Welcome to the Words That Change Lives podcast, helping leaders, coaches, and small business owners to 10 times the impact of their message. Join us as we delve into the art of powerful language, enabling you to speak with unwavering honesty, communicate authentically, and create a lasting impression with every word.
Have you ever wondered why the person that you are communicating with at work or within a wider organisation, within a team, or even at home with your children, and you find yourself bashing up against a brick wall in not understanding where each of you are coming from? And if we're to zoom out and understand that the impact of that can have quite far-reaching effects in terms of less harmony at work, less productivity, less discretionary effort, lack of motivation. When people are coming at something from different viewpoints, it can cause conflict. And in the home environment, when we're talking to our children or we're talking to a loved one, and we are butting heads in a way that we can't quite understand. Have you ever experienced that? Well, it's something that we all face. And largely it is down to our differing perspectives dependent on how we grew up, the environment and the society and the culture that we grew up in, and significant events that shaped our view of the world. This is a topic we are talking about today with my amazing client and colleague and friend, Adele Stickland. She is an experienced coach, trainer, and speaker specializing in navigating difficult conversations and enhancing communication within the workplace. She's got an MSc in organisational psychology. She's an ICF accredited coach, and she combines all that academic knowledge with her real world experience to help teams communicate more effectively, resolve conflict, and foster collaborative, inclusive working environment. And it's all grounded in the belief that effective communication is the cornerstone of successful leadership and team dynamics. Obviously, something very close to my heart. It's something that I help people to do in terms of how they can understand each other better and adapt their behaviour and style and communication. But with Adele, there's a lens that is firmly placed around embracing generational diversity and how, whether you're a boomer, a Gen X, a Gen Z, a Gen Alpha, how you grew up and the environment you grew up in and the things that happened to shape your view of the world and how you use technology and all of those things can also affect how you communicate. And if we have a better understanding of that, then we can do great things together. So Adele is also a TEDx speaker. So she's just delivered a thought-provoking talk around generational dynamics in the workplace. And she's also got workshops and all these other things that she does to help people. So check out her information in the show notes. And I think you're really going to enjoy this chat. It's definitely food for thought and something that I loved discussing. So why are we finding it difficult to communicate across generations now more than ever, Adele?
Well, I think that generational communication has always had its challenges, but today, because of technology, cultural shifts, and societal change, that gap seems to be widening. So in the workplace, we're now working in a world where boomers who grew up in times of post-war prosperity and stability are working alongside Gen Zoomers or Gen Zs who are digital natives, and they have grown up where things are rapidly evolving. They're very globally connected with society. They are very honest with their feelings, and that is in stark contrast to where older generations had their communication process. Don't talk about it, keep it low. Whereas the newer generations are thinking about, I want to express this, I want to understand it, I want to understand why I'm thinking and doing these same things. So, and that can be attributed to the rise of the internet, which I know you and I have talked about quite a lot. And it means that this diversity we have different ways of communicating, different language of communicating, and words that were almost traditionally used have got a different terminology and a different meaning now. The one that comes to mind for me is trauma. So trauma for a boomer is going to mean something very, very different to the word trauma for a Gen Z. A Gen Z can use it in a playful way, they can use it in a traumatic way. And if we get stuck in the way that we use our language, I think we then get entrenched and we don't take the time to understand what that person actually means.
That's a tricky one. And
Yes.
as you're talking, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking the working landscape. Actually, people are not retiring when they used to now. Right? So that the age brackets of people in the workplace are quite vast now, right? Yeah, so we've got people within boomers. I'd imagine maybe some boomers, yes, still in the workplace. So my mum is a boomer. She's obviously retired, but there are lots of boomers that are still working, still running businesses.
Exactly.
So then we go down through the generations, and in a moment we're going to run through these generations. For anybody listening who's thinking, what are we talking about here? Just wait, just hold on a second, because Adele is going to talk us through that in a minute. But I just want to set the context here for us to think about this, because it's such an important topic. Whether you are a leader within an organization tackling this challenge. And the other thing that you've spoken about there is the digital age, the rise of the digital age, and how the different generations have embraced that is another key thing that we need to think about here. But if you're a leader with an organization, you are running a business, whether that's a small business, a medium-sized business, a large business, this is something that is absolutely crucial for your agenda, for your strategy, for the next, probably a permanent fixture.
Absolutely.
Because of how important it is for us to communicate effectively with each other and understand the nuances of the context that we grew up in, the environment that we grew up in, and how that influences our behavior and our language. So that's why I'm talking to you, Adele, today. It's such an important topic, such an exciting topic.
Absolutely. I just want to reaffirm that, Helen, because clients have reached out to me, coaching clients and also for training, and they're looking as senior leaders, baby boomers or Gen X, and they are looking to motivate and engage the millennial workforce, the Zoomer workforce. And if they don't understand the language or how to motivate them and how to engage them, if their thinking is entrenched, then that becomes very difficult to motivate and to engage, because we want different things.
Exactly. I see it a lot,
Yes.
And it's actually, it was unintentional.
Oh, yes.
Because everybody's operating from their own entrenched map of the world, right?
Exactly. It's their own lens. It's the way that we've been brought up. So generational cohort theory, which is something you touched upon there, is the understanding that each generation is influenced, and I use that as a kind of generic term, influenced by events that happened in their life, in their adolescence, when they're growing up, because that has the most profound effect. So it can affect the way that we think and the lens that we see the world through.
Generational cohort theory, something I am going to dive into a lot more after we've had this conversation, because just that just makes perfect sense. Yeah. It's the environments that we grew up in, the influences from society, technology, environment, behavior within culture that has influenced how we show up in the world. However, as we know, because the world is changing and things are changing at such a rate, adaptation and understanding of those changes is crucial. And I'll bring up a term that I hear the boomers say a lot, particularly, and I love, Mum, if you're listening, I love you very much. Mum says things like, when I was younger, in my day, we didn't do that. Things weren't like this. particularly around, I guess, workplace policy and inclusion and what we can say and what we can't say.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I could really go deep into this. It's quite political and it's also quite sensitive. But what I would say is that the skill of critical thinking, the ability to look at the pros and cons of something, you're not going to get a senior leader in a position who doesn't have those critical thinking skills. So, in my opinion, they're going to be able to see the nuances. They're going to be able to understand that in a modern workplace, there are phrases which are obviously not going to be, that they're not going to help people, they're not going to engage people, they're going to turn people off away from that positioning. You only have to look at the increase in the social, I've forgotten what the phrase is, ESG, the fact that companies are signing up to be B corporations, and that's attracting millennials and Gen Zs. So I think that, well, I know from the clients that I have and the conversations that I have, a senior leader is going to be aware of phrases and workplace policies that are going to be in effect. You can't run a company in the way that we ran it 20 years ago.
No, and that's the thing. I think then there's that resistance from the old, again, we're generally speaking here, of course, we've got to talk in general terms, right? Because otherwise we can't get our arms around this conversation.
Yes.
There's resistance from the older generations in how to be more open-minded and understanding of the world we live in now, because it wasn't accepted, or it wasn't out in the open, or it wasn't things that we discussed, even like in the 90s, if you were in the workplace in the 90s or the 2000s, those sorts of things weren't being discussed. They weren't on the agenda. They weren't issues or challenges, whereas those are very prominent things for conversation now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that entrenchment can happen on both sides of the divide.
Yes.
That's one of the points I want to make. So you can have millennials, Gen Zs, who are very entrenched. I'm only going to accept this. I'm not going to go any further than this conversation. Yeah. And if you transgress that conversation, I am going to pull back. So it's bridging that divide, and both sides having that ability to understand themselves, understand where they come from, that explanation and that understanding, that emotional awareness, and making sure that that doesn't impact on the colleague or the person that you're chatting to. So there is that critical thinking skill and that emotional awareness skill.
Yes.
That we all need.
The double skill parallel, because critical thinking and emotional intelligence, actually really two fantastic skills to have. And I like the fact that you're highlighting critical thinking, because a lot of people think it's just you need to be more emotionally aware of other people. It's not just about that. It's also about having that critical thinking as well.
Well, it's being able to see yourself and also not to be aware of where your thinking has come from, whether that's, parental, societal, and being able to sort of pull away from that and get that helicopter view, to get the distance, to get the perspective, and know, okay, this is why I'm being triggered. This is why my reaction to this is here.
Interesting.
And being able to see both sides of that argument. And that's critical thinking. In a nutshell. Emotional intelligence is also that ability to understand that your emotions are perfectly normal. If you do feel agitated, angry, but knowing that that emotion will pass, and deciding whether that serves you in that moment to be angry, or whether that agitation is something that you can work upon. Find out, wow, where did that trigger come from? Why am I feeling agitated? And taking the time to sort of balance that emotion before you go into the conversation.
Yes. So you mentioned bridging the gap, and I just want to put a pin in that, because we're going to come back to that later, because we're going to talk about your fantastic TEDx journey and all of the amazing things you've been doing in this space. But before we do that, for anybody who does not know what we are talking about, when we think about the generational diversity that we have within organizations, that we have within society, Adele, please give us a little rundown of the different generations and maybe some key features or things that distinguish people within those brackets.
What interests me is the dates and the activities that were going on for the generations, but also their leadership style, which fascinates me. And these aren't hard and fast rules. These are theories that people can, quite legitimately push back against, which is what critical thinking is all about. But baby boomers were generally born between 1946 and 1964. Baby boomers, because they were born after the war, economic prosperity, they also saw significant social change. They value hard work, job security, and loyalty. They are often seen as resistance to change. But if you consider the technology changes that they saw growing up, I think it's quite fascinating. And you'll hear in the TEDx talk, if people like the tech giants that have helped us to change the world. I'm thinking of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And over 50s in the workplace has actually doubled in the UK. They're coming back into the workplace to supplement pensions and things like that, but also senior leaders have always had a significant place in the workforce, and they are helping to lead in a way that's often referred to as command and control. So this is the transactional leadership style, because the work ethic was all about work as hard as you possibly can. So Gen X, that's my generation, that 1965 to 1980, they're kind of called the burnout generation because they saw this huge wave in divorces. And their work ethic is work hard, play hard. And they're very aware of collaboration. Their leadership style is very much about collaboration. Now, you can take some inference in that because of the divorces and things that were really shifting and changing for these young adults as they were coming into the world. They were having to adapt to women for one of the first times leaving to go to work. That's where we get the phrase the latchkey kid from.
Yes.
I'm a classic example of a latchkey kid. My parents divorced when I was quite young. My mum worked full time. She was a computer programmer, but a coder, so quite revolutionary. But we were it wasn't that we weren't accepted. I'm very aware of my environment, but I could tell, even as a small child, that a working mother was something strange.
Okay.
Being that the kid at playgroup or school that didn't have a parent there or had a childminder there, it was you could feel the uncomfortable feeling that, you were a little bit odd, you were a little bit strange, a little bit of judgment coming across there. But, hopefully, I know that that's changed quite considerably. The pandemic, seeing dads at the playground, so much more. And that's changed in a lifetime. So yeah. I think that's really interesting. But that whole work to burnout ethic, I think, is fascinating because I think that drives some of the conversation.
Yes.
where we get the feeling that millennials and Gen Zs perhaps don't want to work quite as hard.
Yeah.
Well, look at what Gen X has done in terms of the burnout. Is that what we actually want? So I'll just leave that.
Yeah, it's that culture of being the last person in the office as it was,
Yes. And knowing where that trigger comes from and knowing why we would think that, because that's the way. Again, big generalization, but that was the way that Gen Xers were brought up. They were brought up by boomers who worked hard, and they had to work hard in order to prove themselves and to give themselves that self-esteem, that badge of honor. But being aware of that and making sure that, as a Gen Xer, I don't do that to my children and to the people that I meet and work with, I think it means that you can step back and get perspective on it.
Yes.
I think millennials are fascinating. 1981 to 1996, they are shaped by the digital revolution, but also things like 9/11, the recession. They are often seen as needing constant feedback and recognition. They also like collaborative work, and they enter the workforce under really strict, unfair, harsh economic times. So you can see why their path is the way that it is. They value personalization, like diversity and flexibility. They're
Yeah.
much more open in their thinking. And they really enjoy being coached. So they don't want to be told what to do in the way that a boomer traditionally would do that. Or a Gen X would say, what does everybody think? What do you think? But a millennial was much more interested in, okay, bring the best out of me. I want to understand. I want to be coached. And I think that's fascinating. I really enjoy that. They work hard and they have fun while doing it. So the whole workplace and having fun in the workplace is really important, whereas previous generations have seen the two as very, very distinct and different. And then you've got the Zoomers, 1997 to 2012, the iZoomers. They're now grown up with as digital natives. So everything in their world is, on an iPhone, on a computer. When my mum's generation, an iPhone or the computing capabilities of what we have on an iPhone now used to take up several buildings.
Yes.
You now have in the palm of your hand. And again, you can see that in one lifetime. I think that is fascinating. So we know that Zoomers, in terms of their personal journey, have grown up with global distress because everything is aware to them. They're aware of the environmental crisis. And when we look at the personality traits of individuals, we can see that Zoomers have increased in concern and worry and what they call as a characteristic neuroticism. I think that word is very difficult to label. I don't particularly find that word neuroticism very comfortable. But what we're saying is that Gen Zs are much more aware of what's going on. So they are heightened to concerns. Is that a good and a bad thing? Well, they're still growing up. They're still looking around their world for what can support them and look after them and make them more resilient. So I think it's possibly too early to say whether that curve will diminish.
Yeah.
And then you've got Gen Alpha. They are 2013 to 2025, the screenagers, because they're always on a screen. We don't know about their leadership style yet. We don't know the big influences in their life other than the pandemic and the effect that that's had on their education. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview. Their leadership style for Gen Zs and Gen Alpha is all about inspiration. I think possibly making a big assumption here, but because they've been on social media and they're used to instant gratification or instant communication, they're looking for people that are inspirational but also authentic.
Yes.
This whole neuroticism conversation fascinates me because Adam Grant, organisational psychologist, says that every generation has something that they were concerned about. So for my generation, it was the TV. My dad used to yell at me and say, square eyes, sitting too close, it's going to rot your brain. You're not, negative ions were a thing. We're going to get more electricity coming off of the TV. It's going to rot your brain. And then the next generation, we're talking about computer games. They're going to affect everybody. They're going to rot your brain. Phrases similar to that.
Yeah, that was certainly my...
Exactly.
That's a Nintendo. And I was glued to that as a teenager, and that was the thing. Yeah.
And so now we look at social media for Zoomers, and you could argue that issue or an issue has always rolled through the generations.
Yeah.
And did we survive? Yes. Will they survive? You would hope so.
I think, and this is obviously such a relevant topic for me because my daughter was born in 2012, so she's on that cusp of alpha, but she's certainly got the mindset of a Gen Zer. And then my son is an alpha, and I can see how this is playing out, and I can see the double-edged sword. Right. On one hand, yes, more access to things, even if you have strong boundaries around what your child can and cannot see. And I do. So Alice is not on social media, and she won't be for a long time. And that's my preference, because I'm very aware of what happens on social media, because I run a business on social media. And so she won't have that for a long time, but she does have WhatsApp. And of course, I can't control what her friends send her and things like that. And so she does have access to things that are going on in the world. And she has more access to those things than I did when I was a child, because that was just coming through one media source, really, was I guess the newspapers and the television, whereas there's so many other ways that information can come through. And so this neuroticism is a really important topic. Now, I don't see neuroticism as a negative term, because within my psychological studies, that's one of the fundamental big five of personality. And so on a scale, I absolutely see that understanding the increase of neuroticism can absolutely come with the increase of perceived threat in the environment at such a young age, and being worried about the world and war and environment and flooding and nasty people out in the world, doing things out in the world. It's worrying enough for adults. So for children to have access to that you can understand how there's an increase in neuroticism because of those factors. However, I think also on the flip side, there's benefits, because there's things that she knows and she can form opinion about, and she can get educated about and have an understanding about, that again, I would not have had at that age.
Exactly. Yeah.
So actually it's quite a mature, I have debates with her about things where I'm quite open-minded. I'm quite educated. I read up on a lot of things. I hopefully like to have an understanding of the important topics that are happening within our societies. But still, she educates me, and I listen.
Absolutely. I love that. Can I tell you a quick story? I was on a train going up to Northumberland for a wedding with my daughter, who's a Zoomer. And we were on this very busy train, long journey up to this wedding, really excited. And we were talking about eating and food, and I had my nuts with me, and I said something along the lines of, "Oh, well, I'll just eat these on the train." And my daughter said to me across the table, "No, Mum, you can't eat those on a train." And I went into Catherine Tate, Granny. "That's ridiculous. Don't be so. How is me eating nuts going to affect the train?" I could hear myself, but I didn't notice it. And she said, "Well, actually, it would be an issue for somebody." And I just dismissed it out of hand. The train, little did I know, was pulling into a station, and there were people queuing up along the aisle to leave the train. And a lady turned round, young woman, turned round very calmly, very sweetly said, "Your daughter's right. She's right.
Yeah.
You have to be more careful and more aware." And in that moment, lots of things came together. Empowerment for my daughter, because I could see she was like coming away from my explosive reaction, awareness of my reaction, but also I absolutely adored that this third person got involved in a family conversation and educated me. And it wasn't done in a way that was at all aggressive, or it was just caring. It was genuinely coming from a caring point of view. And that conversation really stood out for me, because I thought, that's what social media has given us. Mm-hmm. It's given us the ability to speak out when we see something that we're not comfortable with. And when it's possibly life-threatening, and they felt the need to challenge me, I embraced it. I was just shocked, and I loved it, and I still talk about that now. And I think empowering my daughter was a great moment as well. Yes.
That is such a good story, and there's so many points. I just want to pause on that for a minute there, because we got to look at the positives of this, right? When I was in my generation of growing up, I was looking to my mum, of course, as a role model, and she was fantastic. But my mum was playing out the patterns from her upbringing.
Exactly.
And this is not just me. This is a lot of people within my generation, women in particular, where being the good girl, and deferring and pleasing, was the default. And so therefore it's an entrenched behavior to not speak up, to not get your needs met, to not put your head above the parapet for fear of consequence, or you're not knowing your place within a family or a relationship, still playing out those traditional roles that were sort of still eking out and filtering in terms of, if you're the person that is taking time out to raise the children, maybe you have less of a voice, all of those sorts of things. It's a generational, ancestral thing that's played out, which meant that I had to learn properly in my adult years to speak up. Whereas what I'm seeing with my daughter, and I'm encouraging, is this type of thing, that it's not like an angry outburst. It's not coming from a place of anger. It's actually, I'm going to voice what I think is important, and I'm going to put a boundary down around something.
Yes.
I think that is really good evidence that we are breaking that good girl cycle.
Absolutely. There's a visual that I see quite a lot in the psychology circles, and it's a glass of dirty water, and maybe there's 3 or 4 glasses, and the dirty water gets poured into the first cup, and then it's a little bit diluted and it goes into the second cup, a little bit more diluted, it goes into the third. And then with the third or fourth cup, it actually just runs through until it becomes clear. And it's kind of a visual representation of generational trauma.
There we go. Right. There's that word again.
I know, I was very conscious of using it, but it's generational triggers. That's a bit of an easier word. It's a trigger that can still be affecting younger generations, and they possibly see another pendulum swing. So my daughter is incredibly outspoken. I've been doing my utmost to make sure that she is, which has put a lot of older generations backups, because it's not. So I'm fighting for her.
It is a pendulum swing. A pendulum swing. I actually noticed that in myself. I've actually swung completely the other way, and that didn't work too well for me in recent years. And so now I'm coming back to center with the knowledge of both sides.
Lovely.
But the pendulum is a really good analogy for this, we can see this in extreme feminism, and
we can also see it in the last hurrah with coming back into the workplace.
Yes.
Another. It's that we're going to get everybody into the workplace. This is how it's going to be. But that does not benefit carers, people that have lots of responsibilities, people, that have a lot of competing activities. So pulling everybody back into the workplace is a pendulum swing.
It is.
And possibly the last hurrah. Controversial opinion.
Now, I know there's going to be people listening to this be like, yeah, okay, I'm seeing this. I'm seeing this actually in my workforce. I'm seeing there's resistance between these generations because of different viewpoints and opinions and ways of looking at the world. What the hell do I do about it? Well, I know that you've got some things to share there, but before we do that, I would love for you to share about something that's happened really recently that's incredibly exciting that I watched just the other day. And that is your TEDx talk on this very subject. So tell us about the journey with that.
In the end, it flowed. It all came together very, very well. It came from a conversation you and I had around your dining room table, and you said the phrase, "That's interesting." And it was an unpopular opinion. I felt that the younger generation are emotionally intelligent in a way that the brain's getting more developed, neuroplasticity is gaining. And whilst they have got a lot of problems, I do see it as something that they will be able to work through. And this whole generational conversation where I'm speaking to senior leaders and they're asking me to train the younger generation in resilience, I appreciate that the younger generation need and want resilience and they need support, but it felt like it was a unidirectional comment. And we talked about generational differences, and we hashed out some myths that we were both seeing. And I took that conversation and I sat with it for a long time, and I decided to do a master's in organisational psychology, and my dissertation was going to be about this. Because it fascinates me. My partner is a boomer, my children one of them is a zennial on the cusp, and 2 Zoomers. So I knew that the conversation around my kitchen table was quite heightened at times. My Zoomers are trying to educate the boomer. Hilarious.
Yes.
Oh, it's so funny. Love it. It's, all my Christmases have come at once. They're doing the work for me. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I could see that at home, but I wanted to sort of see, and I had an instinct about it in the workplace. So I did the dissertation. And as a consequence of the dissertation, the TEDx came up. It was on my radar because of having you in my life and listening to your podcast. I knew how to approach the TEDx because I'd taken detailed notes from one of your podcast episodes where you talked about what they were looking for, how to get the theme across. So the application form was, for me, relatively straightforward. It was long, detailed, and relatively straightforward. And I put my offering in the ring. I didn't expect anything back. And then 3 months later, I got the email saying, out of the hundreds of applications, you have been successful. Shut up. Wasn't expecting that. I had a lot of work bringing what was academic research into a form that made sense. I had a lot of conversations with the curator about making sure that it was balanced, because I'd come in very one-sided at the beginning of the conversation and pulled it all together and made it make sense to lay people and rather than academic. So tried to sprinkle it with research.
Yeah, but that's the TEDx audience, right? It's for the people, by the people. It's community focused, and but it's a society level message, which is why it's just such the perfect idea worth spreading. And it's also something that it's not controversial, but it's addressing something that it's a challenge that we are facing in society, which is a hot topic. It's a really important topic. And the way you can articulate that through your academic knowledge, but as well as your experiential knowledge as well, brought this together. Now, tell us the title of the talk.
Generations at a Crossroads, Debunking Myths, Bridging Divides. Bit of a mouthful.
Yes, but it does actually explain what it is, which is important. And debunking myths is one thing, but bridging divides is another. And I've seen it, so it'll be in the show notes. Please watch it. It's a fantastic talk. It really does showcase Adele as an expert, which you are in this field and the work that you do, but also the passion behind this topic and how important it is to you and why you have done extensive studying around this, but you also have this great outlook on life and view of all these amazing people within these generations and what they can contribute, which I think is really important. So congratulations on that. How did it feel to stand on the stage and deliver that?
Oh, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. I've done some interesting, scary, adrenaline-filled things in my life. And that was the scariest. I think because I knew so many TEDx amazing speakers that I set the bar quite high, which can be quite hard to sort of fulfill. But there was a really interesting scenario going on for me in that I was in the afternoon.
Okay.
And so you've got all morning. I think you were in the afternoon as well, weren't you?
I was the last, second to last.
It's so nerve-wracking. So you've got the whole morning to panic, to rethink it. Am I going to remember, what's going on? Because there was a couple of things that were, would I remember it all? I have a lot of citations in there. Would I get them correct? Would TED curators push me off stage because I hadn't done the right citations? Also, I was terrified there was going to be a placard coming up saying halfway through. 2 minutes to go, and then a hook pulling me off, because they're very, very strict on
Yeah.
timings.
Did you have the countdown timer on the stage?
No.
Oh my gosh.
I know. But I didn't know that until the last moment. So I was expecting it. And so I knew that I had to really, really practice. But we had the dress rehearsal the night before, and I was listening to all the TEDx speakers, and they were so impressive, so impressive. There was one chap, Adrian, who's a head teacher, a senior leader, and he was talking about the micro cuts that he receives, racism on a daily basis, and how allyship is so important. And that I'm quite I'm in tune with my emotions, shall we say. So I found that really profound. And then there was a chap, Daryl, after me as well. And he was really dealing with a difficult subject about mentoring and mentoring young people that had been involved in knife crime. And just before I went on stage, about an hour before I went on stage, I thought, I'm talking office politics. These people are talking about really important, life-changing subjects, and I really felt quite shallow. And Daryl, who was also in the afternoon, young, very young millennial, came up and saw something was going on for me. Now, we both bonded during the course of the day. We knew that we'd processed our trauma. That's why we were probably put in the afternoon. We could cope with this high emotion. But he saw that something was going on for me. So he came out of the auditorium and stood next to me.
Oh.
Brilliant coaching skill.
Oh.
And he just stood next to me and said, what's going on for you? Open-ended question. So I started to sort of feel this big energy that was coming up. And he said, are you okay? I said, I couldn't articulate what I was feeling. I just said, I feel really overwhelmed. And he jumped in and he said, oh, you've got imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I said, no, it's not imposter syndrome. It's something else. I was trying to explain that what I was talking about didn't feel as strong and as powerful as his mission. And he stopped and he thought about it, and he took a moment, very considered, and he said, but Adele, what will happen is some people will resonate with my talk and some people will resonate with the message in your talk. Okay, that's okay. That brings it down a little bit. And he said, but what you're doing is you are breaking down barriers so that people can hear what I have to say. And that really changed my view and my thinking. I wasn't going on stage to talk about myself, which was where the nerves were coming from, because that's all ego. I was coming onto stage to give him a voice. And as a parent,
Love that reframe.
Profound.
Yes,
really
wow.
profound. And that was a classic example of reverse mentoring, coaching skills, life skills that this young man gave me before I went on stage. And it completely empowered my conversation, because I thought I can stand on this red dot and give it everything that I have, because I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it to break down communication and open up, break down barriers, communicational barriers, and open up what we can talk about. And that reframing, that repositioning gave me a lot of strength.
Oh, gosh. Just another example of how just a few words can change your perspective on things, right? And
absolutely,
one of the talks I used to give was about, it's all about you, but it's not about you. So when you're standing on a stage, you're delivering an idea worth spreading, you're delivering a talk, it's not about you. It's about the message that you are delivering. You've got to move yourself out of the way of the message that you're delivering, because if we get all in our head, then we're focusing too much. We're putting that spotlight internally too much on ourselves. Whereas if we move out of the way, then we're just focusing on the message, and then it can still be all about you because you're the person delivering that message, but it's not about you in terms of what you're delivering. So
absolutely,
what a profound moment that you shared there. And please go and watch that talk. As I say, I'm going to link it in the show notes. And this is a topic that you could talk about. There's so many things that we could dive into here, but I think this has been a really good introduction to this topic, and I really encourage anyone listening to this to get in touch with Adele, look up the links that we're going to be sharing, get in touch with her if this is something that you want to broach in your organization as a cultural initiative or part of communications or whatever it might be, or leadership development. Then please do get in touch with Adele. She's the person to talk to about this type of thing. So thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge and wisdom and experience. It's just so, I always love talking to you, Adele. But as always,
that's mutual.
We have to finish with a question, which is what I ask all of my guests, which is, what words have changed your life?
I think that in that moment, Daryl's conversation changed my life, pivoted me. But if I think more about what's led to where I am, I know that I've done a lot of psychometric testing on myself. I know the way that I think, and it's normally very different, neurodiverse, very different to the way a lot of other people think. I'm quite good at strategy. I'm very good at sort of seeing the big idea, but it's often led me to feel and think that because you're so different, you're not accepted, your ideas aren't worth thinking about. And I was in a book group when I was much younger. I am a bookaholic, as you know. I love books. I think they give the chance to really sort of grow an idea. And I was in a very highbrow book group with lawyers and a chemist and pediatricians, and there was me. And I didn't really feel comfortable or able to articulate my ideas. And one of my friends at the time turned around and said, stopped the group and said, Adele, I really like the way that you think. I really like your ideas. And that, again, was a bit like Daryl's moment. It really stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, wow, she amplified my voice, which is something, we talk about with Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. Amplifying that female voice held the stage quite quietly for me to talk. And I felt really heard. And then when you and I were talking, you said something similar. You said, I really like that idea. I really like the way that you think.
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
And it's things, small steps like that can really change. And being open. I was coaching a young leader, 21-year-old young leader yesterday, who was upwardly managing, sidewardly managing, and managing down as well. Technology is giving her that opportunity to lead at such a young age. And we were talking about that gift of being able to articulate a thankfulness, a gratitude. I really like what you did there, or that was really important. Amplification. Yes. And how that can have such a profound effect on any age, whether you're young, old, or sort of your middle years. Having that gift of being rewarded with a little sweetie or encouragement, words of encouragement, can make such a big difference. So that they're words that changed my life, and they're words that I cling to when I'm feeling a little bit out of my depth. And I think, okay, just spend the time trying to articulate what you're saying rather than coming up with an instant catch-all phrase that's going to snap attention. So that was words that definitely have affected me.
I think there's a really good message there. It's not a phrase or a quote or something like that. It's feedback.
Yes.
It's something that we can all give as a gift to people.
Absolutely.
Whether that's our children acknowledging something that, that we're proud of that they did that day, or that you observe about their character or their personality that that's a strength for them, or a friend who's, dealt with something in a particular way and that you admire that in them, or within the workplace, there's just so many opportunities that we can give that gift to people. And it's just so powerful when we do.
I mean, you and I are both aware of that psychology behind that. It's that giving somebody a reward, a sweetie. And we know from research that if you go into a doctor's appointment and you offer them a sweetie, and I'm talking about a sweetie in terms of a compliment, or you notice something, or you give them something, and I'm going to throw out a statistic here because I can't remember what it is, you're 78% more likely to get a better diagnosis. Because it shifts someone from that fixed mindset into a growth mindset. They feel more relaxed. They feel instantaneously more thoughtful, more considered. So it actually has that double benefit.
Well, there we go. We can end on a bit of science. I love that. Thank you so much, Adele, for coming on. Really enjoyed our conversation. And as I say, go out and check all the links in the show notes so you can find out more about Adele.
Thanks for listening to Words That Change Lives. Please rate, review and follow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really means the world and helps me to reach more people so that we can all harness the power of our words and change lives for the better.